Hi everyone, my name's Walter Dean. This is my presentation on the African American freedom movement of the 1960s and 50s. Um, one of the two of the key goals that was wanted by almost all black activists was the ending of segregation in schools and every public place back then in the 60s, and for them to be considered equal and get voting rights and put an end to Jim Crow era laws that prevented them from um, voting, like poll taxes and literacy tests. Um, One of the strategies they used was sit-ins. Sit-ins were fairly common in the early part of the 60s. Obviously, the Greensboro sit-ins are some of the or probably the most famous sit-in. Um, but that sit-in led to a wave of student activism among all kinds of people. David Forbes, who was a student in Raleigh, I forget what university, it said that he was arrested along with some other students in Raleigh, and has said that Raleigh was a politely racist city. And um, and another integral part of student activism was the conference at Shaw University. Not many people know about that. Um, Many young student activists, like future U.S. Congressman, and he's recently deceased, John Lewis. He's always up to good trouble, as he would say. Um, were there, and there was a big dissension in the movement at that time because there was a lot of leaders there, like Martin Luther King and Ella Baker, who were adults and they felt like they should possibly lead the movement. But then Ella Baker shut that down and said that since this is the students' conference, they set all this up, they should be the ones to lead the conference. And I think that's really a first wave of student activism amongst the African American community around this time. Um, the conference at Shaw would lead to sit-ins later in Greensboro and across the country in nine other states, in nine not nine other states, but 9 states, including North Carolina. Um, and there was a lot of opposition to this from the government, especially college administration. I can't think of his first name, but Blackwell, the dean of the Women's College in Greensboro, Blackwell, was opposed to it and sent a letter out, or had a speech, I'm sorry, um, detailing that he was opposed against students joining these sit-ins. And eventually it made its way to our governor, Luther Hodges, and he sent it out to all state-sponsored schools that students should not join these sit-ins and that they would not be supported. Um, this is fairly common in this era. Most of the South at this point was controlled by Dixiecrats, segregationists, people like George Wallace, who said things along the lines of segregation forever. George Wallace is most famously known, though, probably for standing in the doorway at the University of Alabama, where he would not let African American students in, along with the Alabama State Guard. But even with all this opposition, there would be a light at the end of the tunnel. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 guarantees all citizens protection under the 14th Amendment and basically ended segregation. Of course, there were still some states that did not comply with that until at least the early 70s. My aunt told me Lumberton High School was not integrated until 1969 when she was a senior. Um, and there was the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which ended literacy tests, poll taxes, and gave every minority a right to vote in this country, which was one of the greatest civil rights act. Was one of the greatest acts by Congress in American history.